Dear friends, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to St. Michael's College.
Thank you.
We believe at St. Michael's that there is no facet of human life that the way, truth, and light of Jesus Christ doesn't impinge, doesn't touch, doesn't inspire. And therefore, on a regular basis, we have reinstituted a Friday evening forum where we gather a few people. Happy to say that there appear to be more online than are present here, and hopefully our numbers will swell later on, but we must be prompt. We've gathered to interrogate a subject of public concern, maybe a public concern to the affairs of the church, its teaching, but also matters of civil interest, which also have a moral impact. And therefore, the publication of Pope Leo's Magnifica Humanities, a wonderful treatise on a variety of subjects, but particularly today on the rising issue of artificial intelligence, is before us. This is the first of a series because we wish to take various segments of His Holiness's encyclical, as it's called, and to describe more of its meaning, and particularly its meaning in the Christian and in the Jamaican context. And so today we're delighted to have Chad Niemeyer with us. Chad is a staff software engineer with around 11 years of experience, currently building AI coding agentic systems. His career spans performance engineering and distributed systems work with several technology companies internationally. Along with his technical work, he's preparing to pursue an MPhil in theology. We're very interested in you, Chad. We want your mind and we want your body, with long-term doctoral interests in the relationship between technology, philosophy, and religion. He brings both hands-on engineering knowledge of how AI systems actually work and a theologically grounded concern for how Christians should think about and use them. What a topic. What an introduction. 2 weeks' time, we hope that we will have another session, and indeed 2 weeks after that, further sessions. This is a preview of coming attractions. May I welcome you all and present an excuse for Archbishop Richards, who wanted to be here. He said he had a function in Mandeville which might prevent him, so we excuse him on this occasion. We have his full support. We also have an excuse from Father Martin Banderhorst, who is recently come to Jamaica, and he is the successor principal of St. Michael's College and Seminary. We begin all our functions with prayer, and I'm inviting Deacon Peter Espeut to offer a prayer before Chad begins his presentation.
Thank you, Ronnie. Let us call upon the presence of the Trinity and we pray in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Blessed Trinity, we realize that the three of you make a community. That you, our God, are social in being. And therefore, when we resemble you in your Trinity, in your social relations. And today we explore the social relations that guide us as a people. And in that we resemble you, Father, Son, and Spirit. And we thank you for our Holy Father Leo, who has summarized the last 140 years of Catholic social teaching in this wonderful document that focuses on the magnificence of humanity. We ask you to bless this event this afternoon as we explore your social teaching, in particular to do with digital matters. Bless our presenter, bless our chair, Bless the audience as they listen and put together their questions that they will put to the speaker. I ask you to bless all of us in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Peter. Now you can know a man is serious when he brings his wife to the presentation as well. And his father. I tell you, that's rearmament, isn't it? Thank you, Ian from the Gleaner, who is here. Thank you, Brother Gabriel, for setting up all kinds of good things, and Deacon Chambers for all his technology inspiration, as well as to Nari Berry, who is doing similar things. Chad, it's your turn. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Reverend Fritz, for that lovely introduction. And thank you to the faculty of St. Michael's for bestowing upon me this honor to really speak about such a topical issue, especially Reverend Sidney Laurie as well for inviting me as well. I titled this discussion, because really it is a discussion, in a great act of humility, The Way of Nehemiah. And really, I mean, you'll understand why it was called so, because the Pope himself said that we should be following the way of Nehemiah, and I second that most certainly. But really, this is a discussion on AI stewardship, not a dictation. I do believe in the true culture of engagement, which His Holiness Pope Francis dictated or encouraged us to do. We should be in dialogue about this. This is the reality that we exist within now. We are in the generative AI era. And so there is no one way. And I really like that Reverend Dispute mentioned that we need to think about this within the Jamaican context, because we have something to contribute to this discussion as well. And so let's dive in, So what really are we building? And this ties into what was being said in relation to the way of Nehemiah. Scripture gives us two construction sites, really. So one is a project, a language, an ambition. And this, of course, as we see in Genesis, is the image of Nimrod's Tower of Babel. And, I must say, this actually came to me when the church of my formation, Grace Missionary Church, had invited me to do this talk. That was the first thing, a similar talk rather. That was the first thing that came to my mind as well. So I really feel that God ordained this, because 2 weeks after I had given that talk at Grace Missionary Church, when the Pope had published his encyclical, he referenced the same imagery. And it is very, very poignant, because here we see a group of people, not any particular group, but what could seem as a diverse group of people with one ambition, but an ungodly ambition, and that is to reach heaven by its own power. And we contrast that with Jerusalem, which, having been devastated by Babylonian colonialism, imperialism, Nehemiah fasts and prays and surveys the damage in silence, but does not impose a solution from above, but rather, as the architect, returns to Jerusalem and convenes with the families, assigning a section of the wall, listens, coordinates, and so that city is reborn, not through the initiative of one individual, of Mr. Nehemiah, but through the collective effort of the populace of that time. And so, as is written in Magnifica Humanities, it's one of uniformity, not one of uniformity, but one of communion. And so we must resist this Babel syndrome, which is really kind of an idolatry that prioritizes profit at the sacrifice of the weak, and a uniformity that neutralizes our differences. Realizing that, listen, we're all different. We have some quirks. Paul writes a lot about that in his letters, or epistles rather, about the various quirks that church communities go through. We all learn to have to learn to live with people who we don't like. Otherwise, Jesus wouldn't tell us to love our enemies. So I think one of the important things that needs to be clarified is what really is AI. Because to use a Straussian term, it's referred to, I would class it at least as a floating signifier. And there's a woman named Lucy Suchman who speaks about this in great detail from an anthropological perspective. But really and truly, I think a lot of people have no idea what AI is, and it is used to classify a lot of different things. People just think, well, now that I see these generated videos, that's AI. But what about when you go on YouTube and it knows what videos you like, or if you go on Amazon a lot like I do, unfortunately, it tells you what kind of items would be good to buy together. Is that AI? Something to think about. So AI did not appear overnight. This term is really about 80 years old, older than some of us. And yet, I would even say the foundations of it stretch back even further, almost 100 years ago. And you could even say all the way back to, great Catholic thinker Blaise Pascal as well, who created the first algorithm. But I would say if we really look at the 40s, that was the beginning of this kind of radical shift in statistics. And so David Blackwell, who recently NVIDIA, which is one of the major, or you could say in the Western world, the major chip GPU manufacturing companies, paid homage to him, is one of the great mathematicians of our time, and in fact the first African American in the National Academy of Sciences, and was really just a prolific academic. But fundamentally, how he contributed to what we have now is through the Rao-Blackwell theorem. I have my pointer here. And it was really a rigorous way to improve statistical estimation. I said, Chad, what does this have to do with AI? We'll soon get there. But this is really quite fundamental to what we are actually using today when we use ChatGPT to generate a poster or to create a video about politicians and all of these things. And also quite importantly, his contributions to decision theory and Bayesian statistics as well. And so modern machine learning, which is kind of the what is happening in the background when these models are being trained, is at its core probabilistic. It's probabilities. So if you paid attention in math class, like most of you did, this should be simple stuff for you guys. So I state that because I really want to make the distinction between a thinking machine, if there is such a thing. I am going to argue that there is no such thing as a thinking machine, and a statistical pattern engine. Because usually when we're talking about it, just colloquially, people will say the AI thinks or the computer thinks. And we can really kind of reify this idea that the computer is thinking, when thinking is really something that is uniquely human. And so what's happening is we're seeing kind of statistics on steroids here. This is another slide that kind of goes through the technicalities of it. I won't spend too much time on it, but this is really what happens when you go from entering a sentence into ChatGPT to then actually getting out another sentence or another image. It's really guessing what is the next token. And you could say a token is the smallest unit, almost like a syllable, of a representation of what we would see as output. Very technical, but done with that part now. So what people call AI today really is these massive neural networks, again going back to Bayesian probability that Blackwell was fundamental to, which is trained on billions of words, billions of petabytes of data sets, and pattern matching at scale. So the computer is just doing this rapid pattern matching. As opposed to undergoing experiences, having an embodied intellect. I feel hungry and so I'm vexed. A hungry man is an angry man. And so that might lead me to certain conclusions. Feeling joy, feeling pain, participating in Holy Communion, all of these things that influence how we come to conclusions. That's not what is happening inside of these GPUs. And so, it's a form of statistical adaptation based on data and feedback, which can be very effective, but that's not really inner growth. So, why are we seeing then particular individuals responding to this as if to say it is going to create a fleet of robots that are going to take over the world and everybody's going to be, dodging out RoboCop? Because there is I guess you could say legitimate claim, because there's a movement of very influential people who are aiming to build what is called artificial general intelligence, a term that I take issue with, because how do we even define intelligence? Even up until in the 1980s, 1990s, what was intelligence defined as, right? Was it your SAT score, your CSEC score, your CAPE score? I know particular ministers of education are very critical of standardized testing, and I agree with them on that. So can AI even begin to replace the mind if we don't have a shared definition of what intelligence is? There was a book that was written by Meredith Broussard, who I think she's a professor at New York University, called Artificial Unintelligence. But it really kind of challenges this techno-chauvinism. Pope Francis called it the technocratic paradigm. This idea that technology is always a solution. And the problem we have, world peace, world hunger, whatever it is, we can just build a solution and people will use it and all will be well. And you certainly see certain billionaires pushing that narrative. But in fact, what we're seeing is that computers are not sentient. They're operating on mathematical logic, as we just saw before. And in her book, she illustrates the fundamental limits of technology through various, just complete mistakes that have been made in technology, from planes crashing just because they were supposedly on autopilot, to the continued self-driving car failed experiment. They barely have self-driving cars in San Francisco, which uses a grid system and is the Silicon Valley. I can't imagine a self-driving car in Jamaica with our great taxi men that we have here on the road. So, something to think about in terms of how far off we might be from this idea of even reaching a somewhat shared definition of general intelligence. And so that's kind of like one area where we're like, okay, that's not clear, but let's say that is even clear. Another fallacy that is being made is that the brain is not the mind, right? Again, Hilary Putnam, a quite prominent philosopher as well, is instructive, because the brain is really a physical organ. It's, neurons, synapses, electrical signals, and so on and so forth. But that's not the mental life. Our beliefs, our intentions, meaning, self-awareness, other things that sociologists, study, you can't really see that on a brain scan. And so, he put it quite succinctly in saying that mental states can't be reduced to specific brain states. I think that's a really concise way to kind of just say that they're unequivocal, that they're not equal. And so that's also kind of another, It's another fallacy, really, because a lot of the people who are pushing this notion of general intelligence are saying, okay, well, if we can build artificial neural network, like how we have actual neural networks in our brain, then we are replacing the mind. So that's another error with the whole artificial general intelligence movement. And then also, even a second one I'll say is symbol manipulation isn't understanding. And John Searle, who was also speaking about, the philosophy of AI in the 1980s, he actually created what is popularly known as the Chinese room experiment, which is basically if you were to give a computer all of the syllables, all of the letters in the Chinese language, and then give it all of the grammatical rules, it could produce texts that look like it understands Chinese. But would we say that it understands Mandarin? Does it know what it feels like to sit in a chair? Does it know what it feels like to be a person of Chinese culture and interact with Confucianism and Taoism and all of these things? No, they're very different because syntax is not sufficient for semantics. And so just moving around symbols, which is what computers do, is not the same as understanding. So I think someone who really takes this now head on and confronts, certainly in the time when he was alive, and this was almost 200 years ago, the post-Enlightenment attack on religious thought, and that is St. John Henry Newman, who really kind of puts forward in his Grammar of Assent the iliative sense, which is the mind that reasons is not just the technical apparatus of propositions. When we are thinking, we're not just, you could even say, probabilistically coming to conclusions. We're not just a machine coming up with mechanisms and then arriving at conclusions. We have a conscious and a subconscious, as many psychologists will say, and we have embodied thinking. Even just the fact that I'm even moving my hands while I'm speaking. I saw a psychologist from Stanford speaking about that the other day. We don't really understand why that is so. Why do people make gestures when they're speaking? Could it be that thought itself is even beyond the brain? I certainly feel that way because, again, my perspective is that experiences influence how we come to understandings as well. I think Newman had a keen understanding of that. And so our moral conviction that something is wrong, even before we have the words to say what that is, it's a powerful thing. Recognizing a face that we haven't seen in 30 years. I mean, AI right now, you can show it an image of somebody playing a joke on somebody and it wouldn't understand the context of the fact that that's even a joke. Knowing that someone that we love is not okay without being told. How do we do these things? These are still open questions that are still being explored throughout various disciplines and things that make us unmistakably human. And so how does this tie into, what we've been speaking about, Magnificus, Humanitas, the magnificence of humanity? Well, the fundamental principle, which I think not just even our Christian faith, but all of the great religions and traditions throughout the world put forward, people of goodwill, that our mind is grounded in God, that each human is made in the image of God. And I would even say all creation is made in the image of God. And so the mind is not just our brain activity. It's certainly not just our productive capacity. But it's our conscious, our intuition, formed in relation to God and others. As Thomas Aquinas said, we image God chiefly in the intellect, the capacity to know and to love God. Our soul, again, a very important concept for us as Christians. Much should be said on that. I won't go into it. But essentially, yes, we do have a soul. And even for me, at least on a metaphysical level, reality itself is grounded in God. We exist. God is the grounding of reality itself. And so how we think about the mind and our perception and all of these things, I think has to be kind of completely independent from when we're approaching statistical systems that are basically coming to certain conclusions. And so I want to kind of look back at the original discussion now, having done that pretext about how we steward this tool. And so I've come up with kind of 6 areas. I'm sure there are many, many, many more areas. And of course, in the encyclical, there's a wide variety of areas that are addressed as well. Of course, things like the military-industrial complex, which I excluded from that, but we're in a time of great war. But these are areas that I just think for us in Jamaica, we can certainly zone in on, because the reality is, as much as we are not currently contributing, at least in any significant way, to the development of these AI and agentic systems, we certainly have a voice in the effects of it, environmentally, economically, relationally, vocationally. And I would say this one, which is often quite understated in the discourse, truth-seeking and accountability. And so the first one I want to kind of start out with is this understanding, which is really emphasized, particularly in the first section of Magnifica Humanities, is that workers are not line items, really. While AI promises to boost productivity, and it can be very good at that, we want to kind of reframe it, knowing now what we do about how it operates in the realm of mundane tasks. But I think, and certainly when Newman was writing, the overemphasis on reducing thinking to just being able to do mundane tasks, and of course Marx writes about alienation, had forced workers to adapt to the speed and demands of machines rather than machines being designed to support those who work. And so for us in Jamaica, where we haven't necessarily adapted this mass scale yet, as opposed to Silicon Valley or in particular areas in Asia, in China, etc., we have the opportunity to think about, okay, are we going to be using AI to upskill workers, to train our workers so that they can earn more, that they can earn better wages, quite frankly? Or are we going to be trying to use them to kick out the workers and they say, okay, well, they have to figure it out for themselves, because my primary goal is just making sure that my bottom line is maximized. And so, of course, we think about the BPO sector. There's been a lot of discourse around this in terms of how AI can improve the BPO sector. I think we have a precedent where if that is not properly managed, things can go sideways. And we've seen that with the advent of scamming, where the BPO sector was adapted en masse in Jamaica, and people were not necessarily, or certain safeguards were not put in place. And so now people have access to these lists. And so now we're seeing where we have an issue with scamming. And of course, it doesn't exist in isolation, but the reality is, if we had adapted that sector with perhaps more caution and understanding around what are the risks in this, we wouldn't be in this particular predicament. For creation, so I would say there are some misconceptions about the environmental impacts of AI, I would say, because you see a lot of discourse around, how much water AI uses. And there, people are saying, I see these memes of like a GPU chugging a gallon of water. But the reality is, and I thought I had a figure here, but I don't have a figure here. But it's substantially less water than a number of other sectors. I wish I should have had the figure up here, but it's not here. And there's also another diagram down here as well, which I wish I had made it bigger, but it really kind of shows the anatomy of the workforce of AI. But essentially, there are many, many, many more sectors which can be critiqued that consume far more water. And in terms of the carbon footprint, data centers, now, this is not just AI. Data centers is, if you sign on to Facebook, you sign on to Instagram, you sign on to Twitter, anything you really sign on, globally, those consume 1.5% of electricity and thus 2.5% of the carbon footprint. And AI is a section of that. So I think we have bigger fish to fry environmentally as opposed to AI risk. It doesn't mean that it's beyond reproach, but I certainly think for us in the Caribbean and in Jamaica, if anything, we should not be subject to any criticism, because the reality is we are less than 0.1% of that 0.15% and 0.25% of emissions. So we can be a voice in the discourse, because unfortunately, we will be the ones who are most adversely affected as a result of the climate crisis. But we also should be, if anything, finding ways to benefit more from AI systems, as opposed to being critiqued for its usage around environmental. All right. Can you save the questions for the end? Is that okay? Sorry about that. I just would prefer to keep going. Okay, so of human bonds and truth. So yes, essentially, so we addressed some of the other concerns in terms of workforce dignity and the dignity of workers. Of course, that precedent was set in Rerum Novarum. And we addressed or spoke about some of the environmental concerns. And I want to move on now to really how this impacts human bonds, because this is also written about quite explicitly in the encyclical as well. Because more and more young people are becoming increasingly isolated. There is less of an emphasis for human connections, because if I can talk to somebody on Twitter, if I can watch church via YouTube, why do I need to go in person? And now, in the generative era, if I can talk to ChatGPT and it can give me relationship advice, then why do I need to see a marriage counselor, right? AI can imitate conversation. It cannot bear with you, though. It can't pray for you or know you. And persons are formed in communion with other persons. I wanted to say, if I had a quote exactly from Magnifica, Humanities, but I don't here. But essentially, I think most people can relate to the fact that as much as, yes, this can give us quick responses, quick answers, there is beauty in sometimes the slowness of older people taking some time to formulate their opinions, and us younger people developing a patience to appreciate that. And so, I think that emphasis on engagement needs to be stronger emphasized in Jamaica, because as much as we are not necessarily as digital as, say, Japan, I do notice that there has been a decline in Sunday school attendance. There's been a decline in church attendance, even with older people. People don't want to go to church. They say, Lord, it's too hot. If your church not have AC and proper sound system, just forget about it. Nobody wants to go to the old school churches again. And I think we need to strongly push back on that as Christian communities in love, but really kind of find ways to emphasize that this is really an important part of what makes us human. And towards truth, I mean, quite frankly, I've seen we were in the previous era, which I call the big data era. We saw a lot of what we call fake news, misinformation. People probably know about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where particular political parties in Trinidad, in the US, were using people's data that was being captured by Meta, captured by Google, to influence elections, to influence political outcomes. Now we're in an era of generative AI where that same data now can be used to create deep fakes, to make very convincing, I've seen very convincing, as somebody who is in AI all the time, videos of the prime minister, of the leader of opposition, saying things. People have been getting scammed and that sort of thing. I think it goes without saying that obviously that a bad stewardship for Christians of AI would be producing fake information. But I think we have to go further to say, okay, well, what are the ways that we're going to create safeguards for people to be able to engage with this, particularly older people? One of the ways that I emphasize, and I'm glad that I'm at St. Michael's, is the renewal of the somewhat authoritativeness of scholarship. Educational institutions are created not to say that they have a monopoly on knowledge, but to create some kind of third-party trust that if persons have done the requisite studies and have been lettered or credentialed, that they have expertise in that particular area. It doesn't mean that they're an expert in all facets of life, but I think there needs to be a restoration of that kind of respect for credentials as opposed to people appointing themselves as apostles and prophets and then claiming to have authority over scripture. So I think, again, we might want to respond to that. I can't tell you how to, but I think that's something we should be thinking about. And, we have a replacement of our knowledge institutions as well. Again, this can be very much thought of as a new form of colonialism. Some persons might call it epistemicide, the death of certain knowledge systems if you just flat out replace it. But certainly it is that, and of course this is mentioned in the encyclical as well, a new form of colonialism which doesn't necessarily dominate people's bodies, but is appropriating people's data and replacing their existing knowledge institutions to say, okay, Claude, ChatGPT, Grok, these are now the new authoritative sources as well. And so, we might have something to think about in terms of which knowledge systems are we even acknowledging in Jamaica. I think about even going back to Meredith Broussard's book where she studied how African Americans could not even use the automated hand washers because the sensors had not been trained for dark skin, right? Take that up to another level with AI that has been trained by particular individuals that say, okay, well, people who come from this area are more likely to participate in crime. People who are of this particular hue are more likely to do these things. And now we put forward, we want to introduce, let's say we'd want to introduce some kind of AI system that is going to be integrated into our judicial systems, right? We're already having problems with the treatment of Haitian immigrants. Imagine if we outsource that to our algorithm. It's not a good look. Especially, we're having issues with policing right now in how that is being done with inner city youths. We're having issues with people who, I'll leave it there in those things. And so I think that is something that is certainly to be thought about in the adaptation of these systems as well. And one of the things mentioned earlier as well, which I spoke about in relation to the artificial general intelligence movement and the sub-movements within that, within transhumanism, the whole singularity, this idea that, we can create these, build the Tower of Babel really, build these technological solutions that can get rid of death, get rid of illness, get rid of depression, whatever it is, any kind of issue that we have. These can kind of be classified in two major movements. And there's also another philosopher as well who has been to UA quite a few times, Timnit Gebru, who has written quite extensively on the TESCREAL movements. But this, we could see, is a rival gospel, because if the human being is something to be surpassed, some lives become easier to call less worthy and therefore take less seriously. Not as engineering, but as a rival account of salvation. And so we have these secular movements which are really even more religious in their fervor than we might have been as Christians ourselves. And so we have a witness to this, to reaffirm that some of our imperfections in life are God has created us in this way to be born, or to exist rather. I mean, you think about how people might hear that a child is going to have a particular deficiency and they don't want to have that child being brought to life anymore, that kind of thing. If we're talking about the dignity of all human lives, we have to wrestle with those things. And so it brings me to the next point, which is, finitude as a site of grace. And so, His Holiness writes that humanity flourishes not despite limitations, but often through them. To eliminate suffering entirely would mean, in the end, extinguishing love and desire as well. As the Buddha said, desire is the cause of our suffering. And so to renounce this adventure, both tragic and splendid, in the name of a presumed transcendence of all limits, could mean many things, but it would, again, take away what it means to be human, which is in some ways exciting. Variety is the spice of life. Another point, and I'm cautious of the time that we have here, and so I'll try to move along a bit faster, but we are the stewards of AI. This is a discussion on the stewardship of AI. AI itself cannot sin, but we can. And so I want us to, this is kind of an approach that I thought would be worthwhile in thinking about whenever we are using AI. If we are using AI just frivolously, we might want to examine how this tool might cause harm in what we're building, because the reality is the scale that we build when we use these things is a lot faster. You can push out posters, you can push out videos, you can push out websites a lot quicker. But I think if we just act impulsively on this, as opposed to really taking the time to examine and not necessarily assume the morality in the agency of how these things act, we can end up doing a lot more harm. I jumped to this slide because I think this really is another way that His Holiness really highlights the importance of human creativity in light of these statistical machines on steroids. Very recently, he put out a tweet here where he emphasized the need for writers in particular, and I would go on to say all artists, that we need their imagination, their narrative creativity, the lively thinking. We need to create spaces of freedom and authenticity within which divine grace can make the promise of consolation and peace resound. Historically, certainly within the Western world, the church has been the patron of the arts. I mean, you travel across Europe and Latin America and you see so much sacred art. And you look at these churches that are being built in Jamaica. No comment. But really, I think there can be a return, or at least certainly an examination to what is the role of art in our faith. I think it was Pope Benedict who had said, the martyrs and art are the greatest apologetics. Because even the most staunch atheist, at least from an intellectual perspective, when they go into a cathedral and hear the evening vespers, they're moved to a place of tears, And so there is some sagacity to that ancient wisdom, as opposed to just always participating in people or trying to win souls, so to speak, in intellectual debates. I would love to see, or I think it is incumbent upon us in Jamaica to think about how can we as a Christian community reestablish this patronage of the arts? Because we in the Caribbean are imbued with amazing creative intelligence. I hear that in dancehall all the time. So I think that's something for us to think about in light of AI now moving into replacing more mundane tasks, more tasks that are And even when we're hearing about replacing jobs, how can we in the Caribbean be using AI to magnify the artists? And so I think I had addressed this already. I kind of jumped to this slide earlier on, but this is just kind of re-emphasizing an example of 5 questions that we could ask ourselves before we use AI. Again, this is just a framework. This is just a discussion, but we want to think about, does AI edify? So what I'm doing in this particular instance, or am I just asking it a silly question? What's the fruit that's going to be produced from this? Am I just putting out something on TikTok just for likes, or am I really trying to put out something that will produce some kind of lasting fruit? And then even to what we just spoke about a while ago, now that we know what's really happening, is AI even suited to this task? I know for me, I'm particularly guilty of asking AI for any time somebody gives me a task. I just hop on Claude. Somebody asks me what's my name, and I have to take out my phone and go on Claude and ask it again. It's become so second nature. And so it's good for us to have this in mind when we think about, is it even suited? I would say for the arts, certainly not. Please, less AI posters to all my people who are in the private sector. Is it capable? Again, this is now for the many scholars in the room. Can AI honestly do research at the level that it is required? I personally don't think so. I did use AI to help me produce this slide, but in terms of the research itself, I certainly think we have to spend the time reading and going through to avoid hallucinations. And then accountability. If I put something out into the world, I can't say it's Claude make it, and therefore it's not my fault. Am I willing to be held accountable for whatever I produce with AI? So these are just some questions I think we can ask ourselves before we put out something before AI. And so I'm skipping through a few of these slides just because I would like to make some room for questions. Lastly, I just want to really emphasize that in this dialogue, we're builders of communion, not architects of Babel. Of course, prayer is still fundamental. We need to survey the damage that has been done, assign families their section, and center it on God. And I think we are presented now with a great opportunity to evangelize the world, not just necessarily in saying, okay, we want everybody to be a Christian, but to disciple them in the values of Magnifica Humanitas, which is the re-emphasis of human dignity. And yes, this is my bibliography, so that's the end.
John, thank you very much. Okay. I'm told that anyone who wants to ask a question, just come up so that we can hear you. Everybody can hear you virtually as well. I haven't heard an exposition of this quality anywhere for a long, long while. Yes? Am I correct? Yes. I long for the days when the university used to offer this kind of scholarly reflection on any variety of subjects. It doesn't happen, to my knowledge, again, or certainly not very often. And it is extremely appropriate, Chad, you do us an honor, to grace St. Michael's with this tradition, and we need to continue it and deepen it. Ryan, I think you had the first question. While you're preparing to come forward, please do. We welcome all of the latecomers and hope that you are filled with inquiries that Chad can can respond to. I have plenty, but I will allow you first.
So it was just one quick one where the environmental impact. What about the impact from the extraction of rare earth metals, and what is that? How is that going to affect us as well? I think it's one of the considerations.
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question. Certainly, there is, when I was at UA, there was a course that was taught by Dr. Ashley George Hamilton Taylor called Computing and Society. It was really the ethics of digitization of society. But in that course, we were taught about conflict materials, which, copper, lithium, cobalt, many of these things that are plaguing our brothers and sisters in Congo. And so, yes, there is certainly a huge demand on the earth and resources for that. I am not sure in terms of, put it this way, I think certainly there's discourse happening around the regulations as to the sourcing of conflict materials. So for example, companies like Apple, I know are heavily scrutinized. I'm not sure as much about Chinese companies, and I'm not being particularly critical of them, but I'm just saying, I'm not sure necessarily that they are subject to the same regulations as well. So it is a serious concern, I agree with it, because the reality is, in order to manufacture the GPUs that are actually running these models, we do need those conflict materials. And I just don't think there is any kind of semiconductor or integrated circuit that has been created outside of that. I would love, maybe that's an area that we can explore in Jamaica, creating circuits out of non-conflict materials. That might take a bit of work. I don't know if that answered the question, but I think it's a valid concern, I would say.
Hello. I'm looking forward to the days when we can have us beamed in into a session like that. You could stay at home rather than be here with you. And then I could ask you to alter my belly.
You can do that.
You can already?
Alter the belly?
Yeah.
Yeah, man. If you head over to 23rd Swing, you might be able to get
That's medicine. AI to do this. Some of the things that you said, I just want to repeat one or two of them because I think they're so critical. And the first one was that most of what we know about AI is myth and false news.
Yeah.
And so we need persons like yourself coming out and telling us more about it. Because a whole knowledge set is developing about what AI is that has no foundation in what AI is. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Father.
Another thing that you pointed out was that we don't know how, in the creation of these things, how many other people are behind giving their ideas. It's never the genius of one person.
Yes.
And that is to be said. But what gets it from the table out here to us is a lot of funds, a lot of money. Somebody, our people have to put it out there. Otherwise, some of those things will just stay on the development table, And we have to think, I think, the same way in getting our message about the human person out there. What are the resources that we can put there? How to find the resources to put there? And I think that's very challenging for us, and one of the reasons why the other side is winning. They have the resources to do that. And then the last thing is just a provocative statement. Something you said about us not being on a line item.
Yes.
And I think you're leading, so we're not on a conveyor.
Exactly.
Right. So if you think about it, a machine with AI can outperform us on producing things. It is repetitive, can do the repetition better than us. But one of the reasons we make mistakes, I think, is because of our intelligence, which a machine doesn't have. We always say, what else can I do with this machine? How can I improve it? What does it remind me of? I think our minds are always working, which then leads to the mistakes that then say the machines are better at this. And in terms of what is the measure of the outcome, the machines are better. The AI is better at producing. But there's so many instances that show that we have the intelligence and the AI does not.
Yes. Thank you. Those are all excellent points. Just tying back into, how do we get this finished product when we interact with these LLMs, these large language models, right? And you said it's not just one person. And I want to build on that to say that there is, of course, the actual model. So the reason why we even use the word model, it's coming from statistics. And sociologists would be familiar with this as well because they create models to try and understand patterns in human behavior. And so someone creates, or usually it's not one person on any particular team, but a team of individuals, usually very well paid, usually in the global north, create this model, but then there's all of this data that needs to be labeled, right? Because again, we have what had led to the development of these large language models, which we now colloquially call AI, is the internet. We can access all of this information on the internet. They download all of this information on the internet for free, not compensating Dr. Orville Shields for his research thesis that is published, free of publish, but they yet still downloading that data to then train the models and then outsourcing it to us in the global south, who I guess shouldn't be paid much money because of where we were born and our complexion and so on, and have to now label this data. Recently, there was a company in Kenya that actually filed a lawsuit against OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, on this very issue. And so there is a whole anatomy of a workforce that goes into the finished product, but it is not an equal one. And the people who often get associated with these things tend to be on one side of the spectrum as opposed to the other. And so that what I wanted to really emphasize by saying that we are not on a conveyor belt, we are not a production item, is that the AI does really well at these forms of productivity, which is this repetition of these mundane tasks. But human intellect isn't about productivity. It's easy to fall into that trap. I would actually argue us in Jamaica value ourselves outside of productivity, sometimes to our detriment. But we don't attach our value to our productivity. But very much when you go to Wall Street or if you go to Silicon Valley, people are having nervous breakdowns if they are not hitting certain KPIs each week. And so, again, this might be something that we have to offer, not just to say life is about relaxing on the beach, but to broaden the spectrum of what it means to be human. Our music conveys this. You think about why Bob resonates throughout the world. Is because he captured those elements of what it means, what the magnificence of humanity means through his advocacy for equal rights and justice. And that pushes back on the hyper neoliberal desire to reduce the human person to just their productivity value. So very good point, Father Shields.
Thank you, Chad, and thank you for an excellent presentation. I'm a fan of science fiction, and Isaac Asimov is my favorite writer. I remember in the robot series, he had the 5 laws of robotics, right, to protect mankind. I'm wondering if we, in terms of our stewardship of AI, if we do not need to have maybe the UN Security Council or somebody being, not necessarily somebody, being a person, some international body, looking about how we use AI in terms of having rules governing what AI can do. Because I'm afraid that the danger of this thing just letting loose. Yes, AI cannot sin, we can, but the thing that we can make is to create this Frankenstein monster that can destroy us. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I wanted to elaborate a bit more on that, and I regret that I didn't but this is a discussion. I I think, unfortunately, we've seen the UN Security Council prove to be quite ineffective in a wide variety of issues, particularly with the advancement of the Zionist regime. But AI is being used in warfare. That's not a question. You have companies like Anduril. Yesterday, I was watching a Bloomberg interview with Alex Karp, who's the CEO of Palantir, who is a very intelligent guy, but has a very different ideology and view of humanity than I do. But Palantir is one of these companies that's embedded in the US's and Israel and Ukraine's military systems in terms of the use of AI in warfare. And so, as much as there's a temptation to focus on the usage of AI and how it can be detrimental, we have to understand that this is a part of a wider system of a military-industrial complex, which really and truly Pope Francis wrote extensively on how that can be addressed. I am not an academic. I'm not somebody in charge of public policy. So I think, again, this is a human problem. We can see the symptoms of it in terms of the technology. Technology is not neutral, yes. It's developed with certain biases in mind. And so if I'm building an autonomous drone, you know what it's going to be used for. But I think that these are problems now that, if anything, reinforce the need for engagement, the need for dialogue, for even disarming our words, which is something that I am often tempted to do, to lick out and burn out and burn a fire and that sort of thing. But, these are things, again, that us in the Christian community can show the so-called secular world, because I'll tell you, many of my leftist friends, they are not engaging people across the aisle. In fact, probably our parliamentarians do a better job of that, and they don't do a great job of it. So, I think our Christian communities have a role to play in this kind of ecumenical dialogue, which is even happening right now, of what it means to live with people who have contending views, but have similar aspirations.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask the question. But again, before I ask it, impressive breadth of knowledge and information about Catholic social teaching and the application. The question I have really wants to focus on the phrase itself, artificial intelligence. Is it really artificial intelligence? I mean, what is intelligence? It seems to me that if one is taught the numbers, how to count from 1 to 100, and then you can repeat the counting from 1 to 100, is that intelligence? I mean, you're certainly reproducing what you are taught, but surely intelligence is more than just repeating something that you are taught.
Mm-hmm.
If I, as I did yesterday, ask who was the director of education in Jamaica in 1894, and it pops the name out to me, is that intelligence? I mean, what it did was it searched history and found who the person was who was in charge of the education system in Jamaica in 1896 or whenever it was. I don't know if you're familiar with a book called Insight by the philosopher Bernard Lonigan, a Canadian Jesuit, who tries to say that intelligence is really not repeating what you were previously taught, but rather where you take different things and combine them in a different way to produce something new. And he, as I say, Paul refers to that as insight. Can AI have insight, or can all it do is repeat information that it was in other words, information in, information out? Intelligence in, intelligence out. Garbage in, garbage out. Is that intelligence? Or is it just simply data processing? Fast data processing. And so I'm really questioning whether the name artificial intelligence is accurate. Whether we should be calling what these data processors do intelligence, whether artificial or otherwise, or whether it's simply just another form of DP.
Yeah.
And that in fact it's not intelligence at all, whether artificial or real, but simply fast digital processing of binary data.
Yes. Yes. I'm very much in agreement with you. You know, at the beginning, I should have emphasized that the term was coined by Marvin Minsky, who was a professor at MIT at the time. But I think I had David Blackwell, who I had showed earlier, was the great mathematician, had his way. We probably would have had something that would have alluded to the fact that this is statistics on steroids. Because yes, I agree with you. I would even extend intelligence further to include athletics. You know, what's to say that, you know, and this is why I brought up St. John Henry Newman, because he highlights the embodied nature of the mind. But Usain Bolt being able to run so quickly and have such confidence when he steps up to the line, is that not a form of intelligence? You know, I'm anxious just being here in front of 30 people. Usain is running for his country in front of millions and is breaking records. You know, in artistry, when you look at Barrington Watson or Carl Pablo Singh, whoever it is, that another form of creative intellect on display there. I emphasize our dancehall musicians, who probably not many people here are a fan of, but when I listen to their poetry, I find profound philosophical depth in the ideas that they're conveying about their reality, whether I agree with their mores or not. And so we have something to contribute in the broadening this understanding of what intelligence is. And I would agree with you, Reverend SP, that we should not, perhaps we need to change the language around this, but I don't know if Anthropic and OpenAI will take me on in that regard. I turned it off by accident.
Let me make a thought of my own. Localizing all that Chad has said, and the questions have arisen. For Jamaica, has the horse bolted? What can be our result to the proliferation of artificial intelligence, created, brokered, presented by forces that are entirely remote from us and for which we are congenitally susceptible? I'm interested in, as we all are, but in education. And one of the things I drew from Chad's presentation and from Pope Leo's encyclical is the anterior issue. If you don't have a philosophy when you are faced with the ubiquitousness of artificial intelligence, then you're salt. Yes? And therefore, the notion of the common good, which is essential to Christian social teaching, essential to the way of Jesus. Yes? That seems to me to be the area that we have to concentrate on. We can't cut off what the picnic them have on social media or their access to Claude or ChatGPT. But what we have to do, and which we are not doing, yes, is to engage them as to the meaning of life, the purpose of existence, the mutuality and happiness of mutual respect, of the abhorrence of cruelty. All of these things are the only result which, if they are really imprinted and elicited, imprinted first and elicited in the human person, can we hope to have some kind of agency over the power of artificial intelligence. Not to say that everything it pervades is bad, but certainly enough of it is distracting and inhibitive of the kind of flourishing that we stand for. And if that is so, that demands, if I'm right, that demands a revolution of the education system. It demands a revolution of the catechetical system. It demands a revolution of what Uno and plenty of us preach, how we preach. Yes? Otherwise, in fact, the tsunami would have overtaken us, even as we understand it better here.
Thank you, Reverend Prates. I'm in complete agreement. And what I would want to say is one of the issues that I am actually kind of frustrated with is I think there is a growing gap between the churches and what I would say what are classed the traditional churches, the churches that are a member of the Jamaica Council of Churches, so Roman Catholic, Anglican, Baptist, Methodist, and so on, which I think have been excellent in contributing to the great body of knowledge of Caribbean theology, and the lay person in Jamaica. And I almost feel like there's a resistance to technology. I mean, my spiritual director, Martin Shade, just to get him to meet with me on Zoom, I felt was a great accomplishment. And I think we have to implore our churches and our clergy people and our lay people to find ways, whether it is through some technology workshops, which I would be more happy to be a part of, but to really engage, even just on social media, let alone before we can begin to engage with AI. Because the newer churches, albeit earnest in their intentions, do not have the tradition that we have to tap into. I say we as an Anglican, right? So I think there needs to be serious, now this is Jamaica now, locally, how do we address this? There needs to be some serious discourse around our clergy people engaging technology well. I think Grace Missionary, which is the church I was raised at, which is from the evangelical tradition, was the first church to even engage me on this topic. So they are pushing in that way. I think there can be more dialogue there. And we can explore different ways where that is. But it seemed like the horse has charged through, to use Reverend Thwaites' language, in that regard. So there's some catching up that needs to be done there. But kudos to St. Michael's for even having this as well, which is a step in the right direction.
This is really not a question, but I think we have known each other too long. You begin to think like me. I'm the older one. We are supposed to be educating people, not just turning out lawyer, doctors, and Indian chiefs or engineers like Chad. There is more depth to the being human person. And I look at it, AI, and I said, is AI going to overtake us? Ron and we talk about this intelligence, whatever. I mean, turning up history, yes, in that way, and being able to produce everything so quickly. But we really need to keep ahead of ourselves as a human race so that we don't become AI slaves. We need to use our creativity. We need to look at the education system, and not just in Jamaica. Well, I guess we just have to deal with Jamaica right, because America looked like it's, lost in that way. I shouldn't have said that. So please erase that.
Your visa all right, man.
Okay, so I just meant to say ditto, Ronnie, and I'm so glad that you spoke up, because I can't speak very well, and I get very Bye-bye, God, and thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Sister
Of course,
Grace.
you lost me most of it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, in thinking about this, and I really have to say, I can't consider myself tech savvy, but I think that aspect of sentience is something that we really need to use. And so when we talk about sentience and then the greater good, I just kind of draw on the greater good as an input the sentience.
Okay.
Because what is going to govern the way we operate is not just the numbers, but it's the awareness of what is our environment, who we're dealing with, what is the situation we're living in, and how is that going to be applied in terms of coming up with the solutions and the innovations for our society. Otherwise, we're going to have the nice shiny vehicles and the, let's say, hydrogen-powered vehicles going around, and people on the side of the street with nothing to eat.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with that. Again, for me, where that sentence, where that humanity is most amplified, I feel, particularly in the Caribbean and in Jamaica, is in the arts. When I see the dances that people come up with, the slangs, the language, the music, film as well. Caribbean film is small, in need of funding, but nevertheless still a ripe ground for forms of innovation. I say this to my friends who are running businesses in the private sector. That's where innovation is happening, Not buying things from China and America and selling it back for a markup. That's not innovation, right? Which is a lot of the big businesses out there are producing flavored water and beers, like great companies like Wesinco. I think real innovation I see is happening in our music and in our dance as well, where they are creating things that are, these are things that are being exported internationally. Skillibeng is touring Europe. So what does engagement look like from us as Christians with those persons? Is it flat out dismissal as this as demonic music? Or is it a culture of engagement to say, where are the similarities and what is the philosophy that is guiding this kind of creative genius? I think there is some room for discourse there.
But don't go. I want to take you on and invite your response.
Sure.
Because Chad has said that the power of our art,
Go ahead.
our creative forms, is in fact an antidote to and as well as a contribution. But is that really so? And how is that art, with all the freedoms of artistic expression that we treasure, how is that really happening? When in the 60s, dating ourselves now, some of us, when in the 60s certainly the music had the genre, Leslie, of resistance, yes? That I could see. And Zimbabwe used Bob and Jamaican music as the talisman, the anthems of resistance. But when now it turns to the dominant genre of Juke Jacqueline or Bongla Gal, what is that?
A resistance.
That is Babylon. Yes? And therefore, and why is it so? Why has there been this, in my view, degradation of some artistic expression? It has been because the anterior ideological position has been lost. The statistics that I know tell me that we are losing in every generation at least 10% of our children who go to Sabbath school or Sunday school. So certainly we know, those of us who are engaged in education, is that there is no, Orlando Patterson, may I quote him, says clearly in his report that Jamaica has no philosophy of education. Yes? Very interestingly, and we said with the greatest of respect and affection, the person who wrote that report is a lady named Dana Morris Dixon. Yes? Now, when that is the case, life is short. I want to know what is the considered response of people of conscience, whether you're humanistic or theistic. We ought to be combining. When we speak of that kind of the need for a redoubt, yes, I am seized with the irrelevance of religious denominationalism. utter irrelevance. We all have our different sankies. That's fine. Yes, and nobody is suggesting that there should be some, superficial syncretism. But the challenge that we are facing, not least from what Kathleen has outlined to us, makes some of the questions and some of the preoccupations and some of the things which we use for ism and schism in this society. Babylon is mortal sin to divide ourselves in this way, when in fact some juncture, whether it is in the reform system of education, whether it is in the kind of concern that people exhibited at halfway through yesterday morning, was it?
Crossroads.
Crossroads. Whether it is in respect of our relations with external sources. Those are the things that, those are the things that we should be uniting and chatting about. Some of us love church more than we love Jesus, Yeah? And we are famous in Jamaica in dealing with the minors and ignoring the majors. So I'm really anxious that this kind of arresting revelation that Chad offers, and others will follow with, or Father offers, she is the next one on the 17th. That this must, Leo's work is intended. We would be diminishing him and deriding him if we did not take the substance of what he said, which is a remarkable revival of Christian ideology and praxis. Yes. If we are to ignore this, yes, I'm sorry, I'm scandalized. None of it, what, 4 or 5 clergy come to this thing. Hopefully many others are online. What do they? What am I doing?
Thank you.
Okay, that's it. Well, I'm certainly in agreement with you in terms of the need for us to unite in a religiously plural way. But I would say that there are real reasons, and I'm kind of stepping out of my area expertise here, but there are legitimate reasons why there are divisions, which I think need to be addressed. Because even when you spoke about the music of the 60s and the 70s, I would say there's still a resistance that is happening right now in dancehall, in the same kind of lyricism that you put forward to certain norms around monogamy and sexuality and that sort of thing. And we need to engage with that. It cannot, in my view, it cannot be an attitude that, oh, you just want gal in a bungle and the conversation ends there. But what are the historical precedents that led to people wanting to live this kind of promiscuous lifestyle? What are some of perhaps the Puritan inheritances that we have around our sexual anxieties? There's a global conversation happening around LGBTQ rights. I have not really seen many churches engaging with that in any meaningful way in the public discourse. So I think there can be some level of introspection on our part in what can be done to really move the needle to having, yes, this united front towards the material realities of working class Jamaicans. But I think that downplaying the differences that exist may be a mistake in that way.
Our common aspirations come first.
Yes, I agree. But I am just an AI guy, right? Yes, not the Archbishop of Canterbury, or even the Archbishop of the Anglican Diocese of Jamaica, who is not here.
Left unchecked, artificial intelligence has the potential of eroding and dismantling any notions of sovereignty as a nation that we have. Tell me I'm wrong, no? Okay? And tell me again something even more personal, Chad. I had something to do with the formation of the Charter of Rights in 2010, 2011. The right of privacy is enshrined in our Charter of Rights, in our Constitution. The right to privacy is dead. Yes?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
What does that have? What impact does that have on human dignity, which is one of the crucial principles that Pope Leo and indeed the scriptures enjoin us to? This is of real concern. How do you maintain your personal dignity when it is constantly under attack and under attack by forces who are able to contrive and find out anything about you and distort it as a consequence? Any thoughts?
Yeah, for the last 6 years I've worked in what is called the blockchain industry. But for a year and a half out of that, I actually worked with an AI company. But my role with that AI company in particular, because there's quite a bit of overlap between those two fields, was around private AI. And blockchain in particular was created by a movement called cyberpunks, or cypherpunks rather, which were basically people using encryption to create this idea of the fully private individual. Now, in my younger days, I was very much gung-ho about that idea, but I think there is something to be said about the sacrifice of privacy as an individual right for the collective. And I think there are some things that we can learn from the People's Republic of China in terms of how they govern their society for the common good, in terms of access to certain group social benefits at the sacrifice of the individual personal right. But I don't think we're reaping those benefits in Jamaica. Suffice to say, I think the technologies exist to create the kind of privacy that is rightly enshrined in legislation, but they are not being utilized en masse because they are underfunded. And again, it ties back into that broader discussion around what usually gets funded and what is easy to use. I could stand up here and tell you guys, all right, download Signal, use Obsidian, use only open source software and Ubuntu and all of that. I know it sounds like I'm speaking Greek, but I could tell you all of these privacy-centric tools to use, but the reality is the companies, like Google makes Gmail easy to use, Meta makes WhatsApp easy to use, TikTok makes, I can't remember the name of TikTok's company, makes TikTok easy to use because they want your data. You are the product, right? And so how do we engage with it? I don't know the answer for that. I think that's an ethical question. I'd love to have a philosopher of ethics kind of have that discourse. But we need to at least be cognizant of that. You're going to run into friction if you try to use the more privacy-centric software because it's maintained by people for free. It's a small group of geeky, nerdy people, so to speak. And so, that's just the reality that we're faced with, I actually spent a lot of time off of WhatsApp when Meta changed their policy around it. And when I am, just trying to buy something or, I don't know, you're getting an invoice for somebody from something and you tell them you're not on WhatsApp, they're just like, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to send this to you? You can't live in Jamaica without WhatsApp. But why is that? So I think at least having the conversation is a good start, rather than accepting the status quo as is.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's a rich occasion,
Oh, yeah.
And we're very, very grateful. Anton Thompson, come and tell Chad and the audience, thank you.
Well, I think we've been truly blessed this afternoon.
Thank you.
By this presentation. I learned a lot from it. And the most important thing I learned, I think, is how much more I have to learn. So it's a start, and I know that St. Michael will want to continue along this line. I want to, at first, thank the St. Michael's crew, in particular Brother Gabriel, for facilitating us this afternoon. I want to thank our videographers who have been here supporting. I want to thank Deacon Chambers, who facilitated our Zoom contact for this afternoon session. It's very important. I want to thank
Deacon Laurie, you said it.
Oh, Deacon Tony.
Yes.
Yes. Thank Deacon Tony for having put this all together again, and we're promised more, so we're going to, we're going to be waiting for that. I want to thank you all for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. I know some of you are missing an important occasion, but last I checked, the score was 1-1. So, yeah, but it's not over yet, so I won't keep you too long so you can rush back to where you're going. Thank those who are online, who have joined us online. I'm sorry you couldn't be with us. You really missed a rich company here this afternoon, but at least you got the value of it through the online connection. Well, I thank everybody I need to thank immediately. We want to thank the Lord, of course, for allowing this session to be possible. And I know that we have all been blessed by some rich understanding and knowledge, or understanding that we have so much more to learn. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
our presenter.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. And so, big thank you to you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Don't even say a word. And then Peter for a blessing for us.
Thank you. Our next session, our Friday Forum, continues on October 17th, part 2 of Magnifica Humanities with Father Orville Shields, right?
It might be before October.
It might be July 17th. I did? July 17th, everybody. Sorry about that. I don't know why that did. July 17th, 2 weeks from now, Father Orville Shields, part 2 of Humanities Magnifica. Magnifica Humanities. Because we focused on the artificial intelligence side here. There is much more to it in terms of, as some of the things that Chad touched on, the new colonialism that we must be aware of that can be taking place, the military-industrial complex, etc. And so we look forward to part 2. Thank you.
Can we stand and Peter will pronounce a blessing for us?
Father in heaven, we thank you for filling the creation with your grandeur. The speaker said that people can be impressed with the magnificence of cathedrals. And that made me remember Claude McKay, the great Jamaican poet. A communist when he went to Moscow to the Communist International. But then on his way back from there, he passed through Spain. And the great cathedrals of Spain made him decide to become a Catholic. And his Catholic poetry, I don't know why it is suppressed, but it's so wonderful. And indeed, people are in fact converted by the grandeur, Lord, of your creation and of the built heritage that human beings have made. And so, as grand as human intelligence may be, and what people call artificial intelligence might be, we know that your grandeur, Lord, is even greater. And we thank you for the blessings you have poured upon us of our own intelligence and our own capacity for insight. And we know that you have not stopped pouring out those blessings upon us. And this afternoon, this evening, we crave even more of your blessing. And we ask you to just continue to pour down good things upon us. And we ask you to bless us in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
See you
everyone.
next time.